All right, we're in the home stretch, everybody. We can do this. So I think the great thing about going in the afternoon and conferences like this is you have a good idea of what people want to hear about and what they're interested in. And the bad thing is that most of your content has been covered by other people. So feel free to break out in laughter when I show a slide that's already been shown. So I am going to talk about this intersection that I see happening between user experience, which is the team that I lead at Nationwide. I lead a user experience practice of about 70 folks. So we're a pretty big team, except for the fact that Nationwide has 33,000 associates and an endless supply of bad experiences. So even though we're a fairly large internal team, there's way too much work for us to do. But I'm really curious in this intersection between user experience teams and customer experience teams and innovation and how we go about gathering insights. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to start with Dawn, who Amy mentioned at the very, very beginning. And I loved her Norman Door example that she gave. And then I had a Norman Door moment over there in the back corner earlier today, which only that back section of the room saw, but it was highly embarrassing. And it's just named that because design should be obvious, right? And you should be able to know if you can open that door by pushing or pulling. And if you don't know that, it's not a failure of you, it's a failure of the designer. And I'm going to blame it on that, and not that I'm stupid and couldn't open the door back there. But when Don, who's credited with coining the term user experience, brought it up and made this thing a discipline back in the mid-90s, he was thinking about it really large. He said, user experience is everything. It's the way you experience the world. It's the way you experience your life. And then kind of as an afterthought, he said, yeah, or a website or an app, but it's a system. Got it? And it meant that he was really talking about how we connect to technology in a space is more than just us dealing with it in that moment. It's the interconnectedness of all of those things. But despite that, when I started doing this for a living, this is what we were doing. We were dealing with all of this crap, right? Because software was awful and websites were awful, and nobody really had a pattern library for how humans should interact with things in this space. So despite the fact that Don really wanted us to be thinking very broadly about how we connect all of these things together, we really spent a lot of time fixing these kind of broken experiences. And that was okay for the time. But user experience has grown up a lot, and now we think about things in a broader context. So Nationwide actually writes a whole lot of agribusiness, so we know a lot about farming and farming professionals and what their concerns are and what their needs are and what they're worried about. So this farmer, being connected to this bit of technology in his harvesting tractor, he can be really efficient about this because he knows which one of his fields he has to tend to that day, because the night before a drone flew out across his fields and sent back data, and he knows what to do. So we don't want to think about just how he's relating to that interface in his tractor. We want to think about that whole experience. So when you start thinking about experiences that way, it's really more than user experience, and you start delving into the world of customer experience. I was sitting by Harley Manning all day. I don't know if he's still here, but this slide actually comes from his book, so I should give him credit because he's around here somewhere. But he wrote a book called Outside In, where he talks about these 6 components of user experience. I want to do a quick show of hands here. So how many of you are on a user experience team or have a user experience team in your organization? Okay, go ahead and put those down. Now, how many of you have a customer experience group in your organization? So about the same amount. Now, how many of you have both in your organization? All right, so you guys are probably experiencing some of the same battles that we experience at Nationwide. We have a user experience group and a much smaller customer experience group, and we kind of have created these artificial boundaries where user experience squarely manages design, the customer experience team squarely manages culture, and sadly, macro-level management. The user experience team, we're not that very disciplined in that. We'll measure at the project level, but not at the macro level. But all of those things in the middle, we kind of fight over. And we have different ideas about insights and where they should be gathered and how they should be gathered and how they should be applied. So we're kind of feeling our way into sharing that space right now, which makes for a lot of interesting conversations. And I'd like to talk about how there are also these foundational elements of customer experience. And there's been a lot of talk today about going from strategy to execution. And it's kind of laid out this way on this slide, where you have to have these guiding principles, and those are sometimes your more marketing level components. We were talking about brand and brand strategy and what's your value proposition and what are your brand characteristics. And then you need to go out and get these experiential insights, which can be organized in an experience framework, and all of that's necessary to inform your design criteria, so you can eventually pass this off to designers and they can design things that your customers actually want. So you can organize these in either a broad level or a deep level, but you absolutely need to get to that deep level of insights if you're going to get to design criteria. And that's important because if you come with a very surface level insight, and this is actually a real one that we had at Nationwide several years ago when we were operating under a different customer experience framework. One of the insights we had was, I expect personalized, honest advice about what products I need. And I think we would all nod our head and say, yep, people want that sort of thing. But how are you supposed to give that to a designer and have them design anything unless they start to understand some of those things under there? What does personalized mean when you're shopping for different products? How does that vary if you're already a customer or if you're shopping and you're not a customer yet? So this is how we try to expand the value of user experience. So somebody else also mentioned making things pretty. And when I was younger in my career, it was definitely my default position to get super angry and start throwing elbows when people asked me to come and make something pretty for them. Felt that was very demeaning. But it turns out it's kind of like a gateway drug into using designers. So I recommend that you absolutely say, yes, I will make the thing pretty for you. And then you go from there and you say, look, I can make it pretty, but probably the real problem is that it's actually broken. So let's figure out where it's broken in this process and fix that broken thing. And then you can move upstream from there and say, all right, we can just design this one thing, fix this one broken thing, but we probably really want to understand the context of how this thing fits into a larger system. And at the very top pinnacle of this value chain or value pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of design is framing problems. So really understanding the right problem that you should be solving. So at Nationwide, about 3 years ago, we really started swimming upstream and doing a lot more of that problem framing, and that was great. Businesses were coming to us and asking for us to help them figure out what problems they should be solving. And then this magazine hit the shelves. Raise your hands if you've seen this magazine, right? 2015, it came out, caused this big buzz. People started asking me if I knew about design thinking, and I was like, no, I don't know about design thinking. And then I read the magazine, and I'm like, oh my God, that's what we've been doing for 20 years. And now the business gets a hold of it, and they start calling it something else, and suddenly it's valuable. And I had that reaction again where I wanted to throw elbows and be mad because everybody was asking me to make things pretty all over again. It's like, we've been doing this all this time. But it turns out this was great because this gave us a common language and common understanding with the business to help expand our value deeper into the business. So once again, user experience people love their graphs and charts, but I think this actually illustrates a problem, and that's that even though there is a better common understanding of design thinking and the value that it brings, we're all still talking about it a little bit differently. So these are, 9, 10, 11 frameworks of how you talk about design thinking. My favorite's actually the upper left-hand corner there, that fuzzy front end, right? That makes people, you can instantly tell on your project team who's going to be really, really uncomfortable with design thinking when you show them that and ask them where they want to get involved and they point at the straight line. We're like, okay, this is going to be fun. We're going to have to work together on this. But I think that's a great illustration of how, the complexity up there. Nationwide, we talk about it in terms of define, design, and deliver. D-School here is the empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. They're all basically the same thing. But people think about it a little bit differently, and I think they gravitate to what phase they're most comfortable in. So if you have to explain design thinking to a new business person, I think the main thing is to focus on two things. You start with empathy, deep empathy for the problem, and then you prototype and iterate. And that just means you don't have to get it right the first time, but you do have to understand what problem you're solving. And if you can get people to understand that, you're halfway there, 70% of the way there. So I stole this one from Alan Cooper. It was on a Medium blog a few months ago, and I meant to put his name up there. But design thinking is also it's not magic. And people tend to think that there's some magic in design and magic in design thinking. And he used the parable of the traveler with the magic stone who could make stone soup. And probably most of you have heard this a long time ago when you were kids, but you forgot about it. The traveler comes to a village. He's hungry. He has nothing. He takes out his pot. He puts a stone in it. People start to come and ask him, hey, what are you doing there? He's like, I'm making stone soup. And they're like, is it good? He's like, yeah, it's great, but it would be a lot better if I had a few scraps of meat. And somebody runs off and gets a few scraps of meat. Somebody runs off and gets some onions and carrots. They get it all in there. The whole town shows up. They've got a big pot of soup. They all have soup. They're all super happy. And at the end, the traveler gives them the stone and says, I'm giving this to you so you'll never go hungry. You have the magic stone. You can always make soup. And then he walks off to the next village and, of course, picks up a stone along the way so he can pull the same prank on the next town. And the importance of the story is that the traveler knew that it wasn't magic, right? The stone is a device that brings people together. And that's kind of what design thinking is. It's a device, it's a set of tools that will bring people together to help solve a common goal. So there's a couple of superpowers in it. One, we've heard a lot of people talk about this already today, so I won't really belabor it, but there's the power of co-creation. And this is just bringing people together, designing with the end user in mind, inviting the end user to design with you, inviting IT to come design with you, inviting the business to come design with you. There's power in everybody getting together and doing that simultaneously. There's power in using this to sell the vision. So sometimes it's hard to get business people to understand what the end goal that you're trying to achieve. And if you can actually articulate that, I loved the video, produce a video of it to make sure that you get crystal clear on what it is that you're trying to solve. But any sort of device you can use to tell the story and socialize the story will help you on your journey. And then finally, it's also the power of empowerment. And that really is that we're talking about big D design. Anybody can be a designer. Anybody maybe can't do the design portion of it, but they can do the problem solving and thinking portion of it. So even though we sometimes like to hold tight to our craft and keep all those tools to ourselves, it does make a lot of sense to give that away and teach other people how to do it, because it really ultimately helps further your goals. So that's all I have before bringing up the panel.
Thank you, Heidi. We're going to ask Melissa Ferrer, Research and Strategy Lead, Insights and Product Design at MetLife, and Jen Brizelli from MadPow to join Heidi up on stage to continue the discussion on delivering world-class customer experience.
All right. So, is it still on? It's still on? Okay. How about we go ahead and start with you, Melissa, and just talk a little bit about who you are, where you are right now, and what you're working on in the insight space currently.
Sure. Good afternoon, Is this on? Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Ferrer. As mentioned, I'm a research and strategy lead in the marketing sciences department at MetLife. There I work on user research to inform customer experience design. I have experience in the financial service industry at both client side and consulting side. So most of my experience is actually on the consulting side, where I worked with a couple of different agencies doing technology consulting at Infosys and Everest Group, with primarily financial services companies, but worked with healthcare, CPGs, high tech. I pretty much ran the gamut to help them redesign their customer experiences via online, digital platforms, mobile, and sometimes in-store physical experience as well. So a lot of my work has been spent on the initial research design prototype phase, and have experience conducting design thinking workshops and helping clients through that, but also staying along for the implementation phase, where I work with the technical developers to actually write the user stories and business requirements for all these wonderful ideas that we came up with it in that first phase. So it's pretty important to have a full understanding of that whole life cycle and understand which different parties need to be involved in that process, when and how, and help them to understand how they interact with one another. And a lot of that has shaped with what I do at MetLife today, in terms of focusing more so on the research and design part of things, but also helping to bring that voice of the next technology phase into that preliminary report, because it's not a bit of experience that most people have.
All right, Jen.
Same question.
Same question.
So I co-lead our service design and experience strategy team at MadPow, and my background is in UX design, but actually going back even further from there is in education. I was a high school teacher for many years, so I kind of bring that perspective to what we do. And I think in the same way that teachers create learning experiences, designers and pretty much everyone in this room is creating some kind of experience with some end in mind. So for students, we're obviously trying to create not just someone who can recite back facts, but who is a well-rounded human being. So when we talk about financial well-being, we're talking about not just someone who was successfully able to make a transaction or put in a deposit, but is going to have a well-rounded understanding of basically what we've talked about today, the ability to make good choices and to feel like they can live a good life. So on our team at MadPow, we essentially do most of what we've been talking about today, but sometimes that spans the gamut from the various earliest parts of research and discovery and understanding to develop customer insights, help clients understand where they have those insights, where they need them, and then moving through that to figure out how to use design thinking in some of the ways you mentioned. Part times it's to actually do the co-creative and design activities. Part of the time it's to help sell the value of a particular process or a service model to others within the organization, and then ultimately creating the tools and the operational and sort of technological capabilities to actually make that stuff real. So.
I just want to point out that Jen has a fuzzy front end tattoo on her arm, so she loves that diagram even more than I do. But it's there.
So in case I ever forget how to do the work I do on a daily basis, I've got a little cheat sheet.
So we'll follow the same format as the other panels. If you guys have a question and you want to be entered into the drawing for whatever the fabulous prizes are, go ahead and send it out on Twitter. If you don't like Twitter and you want to raise your hand, we'll make sure we get a microphone to you. So first question I have for you guys is, there's been a lot of talk about sometimes, oftentimes, many times, the business will come with the solution in mind, right? So they have an idea of what they want it to be, but they will employ us to get insights to make sure it's along the right track. And I just want to ask, what happens when you gather those insights and they run counter to preconceived held beliefs or sacred cows in the organization? How do you go about dispelling that or confronting that in a productive way?
Sure. So I've run into this issue many a times on the client side as well as in consulting. I mean, it's on the consulting side, we come in, it's kind of understood that the client will have something that they want to push forward, but they're, bringing us in sometimes to just check boxes. So like, okay, we want to do a design thinking workshop. We want to get everyone excited. And then we're going to want to go with this solution that we know is right, but is not necessarily based on anything. So in those kind of situations, it's a little bit easier to handle when you are on the outside and you can kind of ask the probing questions. So like, where did this decision come from? Or an example I'll use is I work with a cards and payments company, and they were very much dead set on designing a 60-second instant decision solution. And so we're like, okay, we didn't have any strong opinions on it in the first place, but upon asking the client, we asked them, why do you want to do this? Like, because so we can be best in class. Okay, based on what? What have your customers said about this? Is there any feedback that you've gotten directly from customers? And they would show us some, simple desk research that they've run and so forth. But we'd kind of, put into this perspective that we'd want to probe what actual customer feedback have you received on this, and kind of position to them that it's not necessarily a great, intense, or laborious task to go out into the field and just get some quick and dirty feedback. So we started proposing to them, we can go into our bank of customers, line them up with your segments just to go out and have some quick interviews with people just to get some feeders out there to see what the feedback would be on something like this. So we ran some initial phone screens, very simple, very quick, with just a couple of people from there, so that we could develop a bit of a stimuli so that we could put in front of people to test what would this kind of experience look like, or how would people react to this. Because like we heard earlier, there's a lot of mention of customers will say one thing, but they may really want another. So we'd have to kind of observe or just take note of what their actions are in response to things. So we've just put together some quick mock-ups of what applying for an application for that card would look like and getting that quick decision, and kind of observed how people responded to that. And a lot of the feedback was that, it seems hasty, or I'm not really clear what I've been approved for at this point. What was this decision based on, and so forth. So in that instance, we could really get the client to move over to our side and kind of adopting a more approach that was rooted in deeper insights, instead of just saying this is what we wanted to do, just by showing some actual proof and also putting some dollars behind it. We're telling him, there's some investment behind this. You have a pretty robust IT department that's going to be involved with this. We're going to have to, rehaul some of your systems and so forth. So before jumping to that, we should really do some test and learn, and there are lots of easy ways to do that, such as what I just mentioned. So pulling the client into the process in low fidelity ways and kind of showing them very quickly how we could garner feedback directly from customers was able to get a lot of buy-in from that. Other times, we have gone through processes where we've gone through full workshops and come out with ideas that people are very passionate about, but we've not tested them again with customers. And it kind of resonates with some of the things I heard earlier today, where we're talking about kind of innovation lab bubbles and designing things based on what we think would be best. So in those cases, again, when the resources are available, I do advocate for a quick test and learn, just doing some quick IDIs in the field, again, with just a small sample size representative of who we're trying to target, and showing people the feedback and kind of letting them understand, maybe we are in a little bit of a bubble here. Like, here's our reality check. And it's not to say that if the feedback that we receive from the quick test and learn contradicts what they're looking for, that we throw it out. It's just an opportunity to iterate on it and then develop something, develop a more sophisticated prototype that we can go into some quantitative testing with and get some real, more robust feedback when we're ready to put that spend forth. So it's, sometimes it's a battle. You have to pick and choose when you really want to go against the powers that be, but there are quick, easy ways to do so, just to get some additional early feedback and let people know that you are serious about what it is you're putting forward.
Everything she just said. I won't add much to that, because I think I would probably say all the same things, but I will just say there is a difference between having a hypothesis and having a sacred cow. And I think a lot of times what we get brought in to do is challenge, which is it, and help people understand something might not be this thing that can't be completely rethought, to realize it actually can be. And to your very last point, maybe sometimes, finding out your hypothesis is wrong doesn't mean that everything's blown up and you're back at the drawing board. It means there's opportunity to iterate and change and adjust. So sometimes it's not about tearing down walls that have been set up for years and years and years. It's just kind of changing the way that you're looking at what's there.
You both mentioned something in that response about the importance of having clients with you, and I totally agree that if they're there and they're kind of involved in the process and they're seeing it firsthand, they're more likely to, believe the outcome of that or latch onto those insights and carry them forward. Have you, I personally, so this would be great if you guys have a solution for this. I see that there's a lot of enthusiasm from clients up front at the very beginning of the project, but these things take time. Sometimes these efforts are anywhere from 6 weeks to 4 months long. How do you keep clients engaged and re-engaged throughout the process?
Well, I think that part of it is laying that plan out as best and honestly as you can from the get-go, and identifying the ways in which you want clients to be invested in part of the process. So especially in a consulting model where, that is a common kind of pattern. Here we are, we're excited, we're at the kickoff, we're going to do a lot of stuff together, and then we're all going to go back to our design bat caves, like I said earlier, and do our work, in silos, and then bring you this magic thing at the end. I think the best way to avoid that is to set up front very early on who are the folks on the client side that have the ability, the luxury, the time, the resources to be involved. What are their skill sets? What is their offering going to be in the process that's going to make the outcome that much more valuable, and identifying a role for them to play, so that if you can carve out together collaboratively a role for everyone on the client side to play, then they see themselves in that role and will stick around, at least in my experience, a little bit more significant way throughout the project. If it's just hey, we're going to have a check-in every week, that's not a role, that's a meeting. But having a role for someone to play in terms of being a contributor or a collaborator, or even just I want to be able to talk about these ideas with you, having that set from the beginning and not so ad hoc along the way really goes a long way.
Sure, and what I would add to that is, having been on the consulting side, we know how much work that goes into building out these prototypes and actually getting them to launch, because we're the ones that are in the weeds and doing all that nuts and bolts work. And then on the client side, sometimes all of that is not necessarily clear to them. We have our own things to do on the client side. We're not following everything that our partners are working on. So to the degree that you can help clients understand, and like you're saying, bringing them into that process, but even if they're not involved in the process, but just bringing to light the many components that are part of actually bringing a product to launch, and how long that takes, and what the commitment is from them in terms of their time as well as dollars, is definitely helpful. I think, a lot of people, like I said before, get excited about doing a design thinking workshop, and then they kind of lose momentum because it's like, okay, well, this is not really feasible. Well, it can be, but again, it's in small stages. What's our MVP 1? What does that look like? How soon can we get that all the way down to, what's our solution going to look like in 5 to 7 years? If that's set up early on enough in the first place, and people understand why that is in terms of And a lot of the constraints will exist on the client side in terms, like, especially if it's a technology solution, they're outdated systems or where the resources are and what their availability is, and in terms of, you know, resources that are onshore, nearshore, and so forth. Like, helping them understand that process, and because to them it's kind of just like, okay, we paid you for something, we want something very tangible thereafter, but understanding, okay, here are the different components of this process without making it seem so overly complicated that they're like, well, why do we pay you for this? But just letting them know it's going to take longer, but it is worth it at the end is very helpful.
Just want to do a quick check to see if there's any hands out there, any questions. There's a question back there. We'll wait for the mic.
It's coming.
Thank you. My question is towards the customer research that you do. Do you do research with the non-tech oriented person or an expert person?
I couldn't hear the last part of it.
What kind of research do you do with the user? I mean, what kind of users do you pick up while you're doing your research? Is it like the expert level or the non-expert level?
So like expert versus non-expert, or tech versus non-tech?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'll just answer quick, but you might have more specifics you might want to chat about. So generally, at least for our practice at MadPow and on our team, that really varies. And I would say, especially thinking a little bit about when I was talking about participatory design earlier today, I actually get that question a lot too when planning a participatory design session. You know, who do I put in the room? If I'm working in healthcare, do I put doctors and patients in the same room? Do I put, you know, financial advisors and the actual members together in the same room? And I mean, the short answer is sure or no. Like, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to build some awareness and empathy for the challenges that each of them face that might influence the other's experience, then yeah. But if you're working on a subject or a topic or a product where you're trying to learn a little bit about something that could be sensitive and such that people are going to become defensive about their role when the other one's in the room, then no, do them in separate sessions. And so I think same as anything else with UX and otherwise, if you're trying to understand a target audience that you expect to be very tech savvy, then certainly you want to focus on those users. But if you, let's be honest, not everybody's tech savvy. So if you're designing something for the general population and it's consumer facing, you absolutely should include folks who aren't tech savvy. And so the short answer to that is everybody. But I know that's a little bit of a non-answer, so I'll bounce that one to you.
For the most part, I agree with what you're saying. You do want to involve everyone where you can, but I guess the nuance is that it depends on what phase you're in. So I would say if you're having a general workshop, I don't see the harm in, I'll go with the doctor-patient example, having the doctors in, the people who work on the healthcare IT systems, as well as the patients in the process. Maybe when you're testing different solutions in smaller settings, or depending on, you know, if it's a quant study, you might have it targeted for specific audiences and then compare the results thereafter. I think it's important to focus in, I'm thinking about projects that I'm working in now, who this solution is designed for in the first place, and kind of focus on that audience first when you're doing your testing. In terms of creating the solution, I would involve as many parties as possible, but we're getting the preliminary feedback and testing and doing that research, I'd focus on who the actual end user is from there, and then kind of pick out, okay, who else is involved in this experience, and update based on that, just so that the focus remains on the person who's actually going to be using or consuming the product that you're developing.
Yeah, I'd love to make a real quick point about research too. I think sometimes people kind of forget we're all becoming more and more comfortable with research-driven design. I think that's not really a differentiator for very many people anymore. It's kind of table stakes, but very, very common for people to think about research at the earliest phases: discovery, foundational knowledge, understanding, probably in its broadest form. You know, you're talking to all types of people, users, customers, stakeholders. And then people are also very familiar with research at the end of a project or a process where it's more evaluative, and that's where you're probably, you know, narrowing in on who you're talking to and why, because it's going to be the folks that are using the thing or the process or the service that you're evaluating. But there's a whole stretch in the middle there where there's a lot of research that can be happening all throughout. So you think about it as a discovery research or as evaluative research, but generative research or design research can be happening all throughout as well. And so if you think about where in that process you are, it can help inform who you're trying to bring into the room for those processes and those conversations.
Quick follow-up. Is there another question out there?
There's a hand over there too, just a flag.
But when you propose a new solution or any correction towards the process that they already are using versus the technology versus the manual process of any such banking application, when you propose a new design, do you also go back and propose a manual process to be changed?
Yeah, no, yes and no. I mean, sometimes, this is another depends, so I'm just going to give you guys that answer over and over again. It depends. I think basically what it depends on is if the process or product or service that we're talking about or that we're designing, if it's being designed either in a vacuum or in a blue sky innovative kind of situation where we are free to think away from existing circumstances, then the thing we might propose, we might propose it in sort of, without the context of existing things. But that's not all that common, to be frank. So a lot of times it is really a matter of understanding what's the delta between the thing we're talking about and the thing we have today. And more often than not, and I would honestly expect probably most people in this room are much more going to be working in that realm anyway. So we absolutely do think about, here's what we've got today, here's this lighthouse vision for the future, and now let's step back and think about what are the smaller and smaller steps to get me there, both in terms of capabilities, sometimes in an operational sense of things. Sometimes it's just technology in terms of filling in the gaps. Do we have to develop this? Do we have to purchase this? Do we have to invest in this in some way? So it's pretty rare that you would ever talk about a new solution without the context of what lives today, unless you're literally designing something that has never been invented before. And if you're doing that, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Got a question over here?
Hi. So I work in a B2B space where there's many links in the chain between the designer and the user. And I'm wondering if you guys have dealt with that and how you've coped when you can't get to your user and all you have to work with are your AEs.
Find some users and just ignore the chain. This might be provocative, and maybe we'll have an actual debate up here. We can disagree. I don't know. But I know there's a longer, more nuanced answer, and you guys have probably heard it before. But my short answer is bias towards action. Ask for forgiveness, not permission. Find some users and talk to them. And when you've got insights from them that drive your design work, you might get yelled at for going around a system, but you've also designed the right thing, and hopefully that speaks for itself.
110% agreed. I'm very much a rebel in that respect. So it's just so easy to go out and get feedback and ask people things and show people, like, especially in today's age with our technology, and we all know people who are, especially in financial services, we all know people who use certain products. We all know people who have insurance products and so forth. It's very simple to just get quick and dirty feedback to spark a discussion. And so usually, I've been in the situations where, I'm working with, there's a lot of, they have this expression, cooks in the kitchen, now I'm saying it too. But a lot of people who are involved in the process who are being motivated by very different goals. Finance wants to keep budget under a certain amount. Compliance has certain regulations and things they don't want to mess up with. And technology, they're not really wanting to go through a certain process over and over again and, working on designing new things so that's a separate animal. But when everybody kind of has their own point of view and they're motivated by certain things, and you come in with some proof points and, again, just ask people quick and dirty, simple, just to start to build your buy-in, it really does go a long way, because you can also say, look, I got this feedback, I was very proactive about it, and it cost you nothing. So let's take it from here, and let's kind of reevaluate what it is we're trying to do here. It's just, like she said, ask for forgiveness later. I know, I'm sorry if that doesn't work out for you, but
I'm going to jump in on this one and pretend that the tape isn't rolling. So I work for a highly intermediaried company where advisors and insurance agents own the customer relationship. In most cases, we do not own that relationship, right? So there are a lot of barriers. We run into this problem all the time where the advisor insists that he knows what's best for his customers and wants us to talk to him and not the customers. There's definitely a gap between what he thinks the customers want and what the customers want. So we are not always able to talk to the advisor's customers or the agent's customers, but we can absolutely talk to financial services customers or insurance customers, right? So sometimes it's a matter of making sure they're not your customers, but talk to end users.
Yeah, talk to humans. That's kind of what it boils down to.
yeah, that was a good caveat.
All right, I think we have 2 minutes left. If there are no more questions, I've got a very quick one. You had mentioned something earlier, Melissa, where you have come from a consultancy background and now you work for an enterprise. You work for MetLife. And I feel like, this audience is probably half and half enterprise and agency. And I think lots of times we feel like the grass is greener on the other side, right? And insights are only as good as the extent to which they're adopted. And I'm just wondering, since you've had the recent experience in both places, do you feel that there is an advantage on one side or the other for your end user, your customer, actually listening to your expertise and using your insights?
I don't know that I've seen an advantage on one side versus the other in terms of staying true to the insights and keeping them a part of the process from the development of them through the technological implementation and so forth. I think it's just that now in this moment, it's very much top of mind. It's a hot topic. So people are more willing to pay attention to the argument that, you know, research, it's not, like we were saying before, it's not just part of the first phase of this process. We can't just give you some discovery research and you go and design an experience and then forget about research, you know? So I think it's more about, because it's very popular at this time. So one thing that I will say is, I have seen on both sides, everybody is very anxious to design a customer experience and kind of takes for granted the amount of research that needs to happen before and throughout the process. And what that means is how we're gathering insights, whether it's in a qualitative manner via ethnography, observations, interviews, or so forth, or through robust quantitative studies. And we heard this sentiment echoed earlier, mentioned earlier before, that the two go hand in hand. And it's very important to think about how we design those studies and the kinds of questions we're asking, and making sure that we're getting sample sizes that are actually representative of our customers and, you know, who we'd like our customers to be. So making sure, you know, whether it's you guys or someone else has a voice in that process and can really, you know, spot for during survey design, like look out for different biases and so forth, and really be vocal in that aspect of the process is really key, because the experiences that we design based on certain insights, it's only as good as how those were captured and developed. So that process is really key. And again, it's just really important to underscore that everybody, okay, we're experience design, but like, what are we basing this on? Where are we getting this information? How credible is that? Have we tested this? And it's not to say that, you know, we need to drag out that process, but we do need to spend a good bit of time and underscore its importance, because it will pay off in the longer run if we're creating things that are truly based on what are valid needs that exist in our markets.
So I'm getting the red card. Okay. So I want to thank my very knowledgeable and esteemed panel. And I think both of you ladies are going to be at the cocktail reception. So if there's any more questions, you can ask them there. Thank you.
Thank you.